All right. So this week we're going to cover Raymond Williams' concept of flow and John Fisk's discussion of intertextuality. Both of these are extremely influential essays in TV studies. Um, Before I launch into talking about flow, has anybody heard of this concept before from Williams? The idea of flow in other TV studies courses or anything else? It's a really big one.
I do have a question. It's actually a really important one.
Okay, sure, Anthony, go ahead, man.
So, a couple of us students, we realized that it was a weekly response due, but we never seen a Dropbox or a turn in.
For this week?
Yes.
Yeah, don't worry about it this week. I got y'all. I was going to talk about it at the end of class.
Yeah, we was.
Sorry to freak y'all out. That wasn't my intent.
All right,
Don't worry. I got you guys, okay? Okay. So let's just talk about flow here. So Raymond Williams is talking about the structure of how television is programmed, okay? So if you don't know what programming is for TV, it's how the selections of programs, shows, advertising are all lined up in sequence to create a broadcast stream, right? And every network does this. Everybody grasps just that part of what the job of being a TV programmer is. Okay, so Williams is saying that television is a programmed, constructed thing that has a flow to it. Okay. The flow for Williams is the key to understanding TV as a text and being able to analyze TV from a cultural and even textual standpoint. Okay. So I want to ask you, just even if you're not as familiar with or not certain about how Williams is talking about this, when you hear somebody talk about broadcast as a flow of information, how do you start to think about that? Like, what does that mean to you? Anybody want to take a crack at that? If somebody says television flows, what else flows? What are other things? Why is this analogy apt? I know that it's also part of it, like, y'all don't watch TV the same way as Raymond Williams was in the 70s when he wrote this, or even as most people still do now, actually. Okay, Sawyer, that's starting to get into what our second essay is, but that's pretty good, right? They're thinking through how related things on the programming side can be played alongside one another or sequenced to keep people who are potentially interested in those things attached to it. Sure. Roberto says that it's very easygoing and enters people without much thought. So without much challenging programming, the audience is able to sit in front of the TV for hours at a time. Right. So Williams is pointing to the fact that the goal of a TV broadcaster is to get you to sit there, right, and watch television, to have it wash over you, right? So if that's the goal, there are these strategies being employed to get you to do that, right? So in a commercial system, okay, which American television is, and to a certain extent, when Williams is writing this, the British system is starting to become one. It's much more commercial now than it was even at the times Williams was writing. The goal is to get you to stay tuned. Why do they want you to stay tuned to the same channel, the same network all evening long, starting at 6 p.m. when you get home from work and turn on the news? What's the goal for them? Yeah, right. ad revenue. The more viewers, the more eyeballs, the more butts in seats they have that they can tell the advertisers are watching, the higher they can charge for ad rates during those programs. Okay. So, what for Williams does this turn into as a mode of analysis? Okay. So, how are we watching television then? If it's programmed this way, if it's structured this way, how do we also like buy into that as the viewer, as the audience, differently than we might more discrete media objects? Because he says this is what defines television as a media object, right? You can talk about books, you can talk about films, you can talk about games, right? Whatever media object, but they're all kind of a discrete unit. But with TV, he's saying there is no discrete unit because the discrete unit is the broadcast itself, right? So how are we receiving this information? How do we talk about it? It's a real big thing for him. Any guesses? He says that we talk about watching TV, right? Rather than saying like the list of individual programs we're watching, right? Do we still do this in any way? Even if we're not watching broadcast television? Is there anything you just refer to, I'm watching so-and-so? Yeah, I mean, it's a very passive way of talking about it, but the idea is that you're locked into watching that thing. Are there any streaming services that we talk about sort of monolithically like this? Yeah, Netflix, right? People will say, like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to watch Netflix. We have a whole set of slang that's now slightly outdated because old people, myself included, started saying things like this, but like Netflix and chill, right? Netflix and chill has a meaning to it, ascribed to the fact that it actually does not matter what is on Netflix. You're going to put it on and other things are important, right? Or it's background noise, as Sawyer said, white noise. Okay. Yeah, people do say that they're going to watch Hulu, but it's far less ubiquitous than saying like I'm going to watch something on Netflix or I'm going to watch Netflix, right? So we're talking about these streaming services sort of as the text that we're going to watch, when in reality we're going to get on Netflix and browse around for 15 minutes because we can't decide what we want to watch, and then watch the same episodes of The Office again, right? Or whatever. Moesha's on Netflix now, so go check that out. It's a great show from when I was younger. Okay, so we get what Williams is saying here generally about just the structure of television and the way that we watch it as a commercial system. Everybody? Anybody? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Can you give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat or something? Because I want to get to Fisk here. And okay, cool. Everybody's giving me the good. Okay, so let's talk about Fisk, because he's also building on and talking around Williams' writing here as well. And they know one another. They're contemporaries. So they're basically just one after the other at this point in media theory, building off of one another's ideas. Okay, so if you're looking at the Fisk piece, intertextuality, right? He's talking in some way also about how flow works, right? To create meaning for us, okay? But he's talking about television in a very strict sense here as well, okay? Like, how do we do the work of textual analysis for television, okay? I forget, who in here has had film theory already? I think it was a sizable chunk of you. Okay, so like Roberto, Sawyer, Essence. Okay, cool. I thought it was enough of you. Okay, so we know from that class, right, or even intro to film studies on some level, how you can analyze film as a text, right? Do y'all remember that stuff? Film theory talks about semiotics, right? Or psychoanalytic theory, how we interpret films, sort of like the same way that we would interpret dreams, um, reveals repressed memories, all that stuff, right? Yes, exactly, Roberto. Indeed, feminist theory on through. Okay, what is different about television and how to understand text on television is that our meaning for it and how it's created tends to be much broader than just the image, the text itself, right? Because of the way that, as Williams was talking about, television is structured through this kind of programmed sequencing of information that we're supposed to just take in, right? So he refers to TV as a highly generic medium, okay? And a lot of this essay is spent talking about generic qualities, okay? So if we're thinking through how we construct genre, what are some of the elements that we pay attention to for telling like generic texts as similar and or different? What are some of the elements there?
Would one of them be like character archetypes, like character stereotypes?
Yeah, indeed, right? So character types or archetypes. Um, we might also think, as Sawyer says right here, general thematics, right? Um, Roberto puts in here, let's see, form and narrative, uh, the way that mythology or ideology might play into it, which kind of ties directly into the thematics again. Okay, so there are these ways of thinking about how to describe a generic text, right? But if TV is kind of a highly generic medium, that can't really be the only way we understand what it is the text is doing, right? Like it's very tempting to say, oh, this is a sitcom, this is this, and then like make the meaning out of that. So Fisk, even though he says like formula is important and genre is important to consider, we have to also push beyond that and think about the different ways that television in particular creates instances in which meaning is constructed. Okay, so he gives us two types of intertextuality. Okay, there's horizontal intertextuality. This is when the text directly references another text. So if one show references another show, it can also be, depending on how you're talking about it, if you're talking about this is the genre, it can also be horizontal if it's referring to another show or film or something else in the same genre that creates that understanding. Although, since it's a separate text, that also might fall into the second category of vertical, which we'll get to in just a second. But the basic idea here is show referencing something that we're already familiar with in another show. Okay. The vertical largely has to do for Fisk with texts in other media and specifically kind of paratextual things. So things like criticism or reviews or news articles or advertisements, things like that. Okay. And at the ways in which all of this intersects on the vertical and horizontal axes, we then can interpret and make meaning out of it at that intersection. Okay. So that it's not necessarily just reading the semiotics, the signs, the symbology of television. In order to actually understand television, we have to look at the sequence of the programming, right? The order in which we're shown things. We have to think about all the stuff going on culturally that might inform our analysis of that text. Okay. Is everybody on board with this so far? What he's saying? Anybody have questions about anything that I'm talking about that Fisk is saying? Okay. Just to point you directly to this, right, on page 118, right after he has that long quote from Hodge and Tripp right at the top of the page, he says, an essential element of television is its intertextuality with what is written and spoken about it. Secondary texts play a significant role in influencing which of television's meanings may be activated in any one reading. So I've got some examples here that I just want to run through with y'all, and y'all give me what your understanding of it is as I tell you about it. Okay, so if I say the words Netflix original, what does that mean to you? You can type it in the chat or you can chime in either way. Okay, Roberto, Roma. Why Roma? What's the meaning there? Okay, Sawyer says it's something you can only find on Netflix. Okay.
Produced by Netflix.
That's how they want us to think about it, but a lot of the time it's actually licensed by Netflix, picked up elsewhere. But yes, that is also a connotation. Something that premiered there first, distributed by. Okay. Do we make any assumptions about the types of programs or the quality of programs on Netflix based on Netflix original? Like what, Ambernice? What assumptions do we make based on Netflix original, aside from like when I hear it? Sorry, go ahead, Ambernice. Go ahead.
You sure? Okay.
Yes, please.
But like, if it comes out on Netflix, it's like underplayed, or I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, for example, when Black Panther came out, it was like shockingly very soon, like on Netflix. You know, it's just like, okay, why'd you guys do Black Panther like that? Like, that's supposed to be such a great movie. Like, how is it so easily accessible to everyone? So I guess like there's like this connotation of things being kind of, I don't know, lower quality just to be on Netflix.
Okay, right. So part of what upsets you about like a big budget, well-received Hollywood movie being on Netflix is that we tend to think possibly of Netflix films in particular as lower budget, lower quality in some way. Okay, so that's good. Roberto says recently auteur driven. Now I think that's much more how they would like you to think about certain movies, and they certainly want to curate that idea. But the reality is most of their films are one of two things. Does anybody know what the majority of their film output actually is on Netflix? Teen rom-coms, right? And they do put out a lot of horror, but they don't personally finance or license directly a whole bunch of it compared to comedies, right? So romantic comedies and then kind of very broad comedies. I'm sorry, who was that?
I was going to say documentaries, but you said broad comedies, so never mind.
Yeah, now all of these are there, right? Like documentaries are big. If we think about the TV shows that Netflix puts out, yeah, Roberto, that's right. And true crime largely does not fall under what we might call documentary film, right? Because it is a TV genre if it's episodic, okay? And this is where Netflix starts to blur the lines a little bit, right? Aside from true crime, if somebody says Netflix TV show, what types of things pop in your mind? There's one big one, and then what else? Any ideas here? What's the big show on Netflix that the only one they really care about? They shoot it here in Atlanta, and they can't shoot right now.
Stranger Things.
Yeah, literally, it's the only thing they care about. It's where most of their money comes from outside of subscription, right? Like through licensing deals. Okay, let's take this one step further. Another textual thing here. If I give you a news item, like just was announced yesterday, Netflix cancels Glow after renewing it. what connotations does that bring to your understanding of Netflix as a brand?
They have no problem like canceling something that's very successful in order to like get people to really, really start to view it and like, you know, get up in arms about it in order to like preserve the show or like do some kind of spin-off with the same actors or whatever.
Okay, and it also informs our interpretation of other Netflix shows at this point, right? So, like, our expectation after, I don't know if you all have kept count, but since the beginning of the year, Netflix has canceled 23 of its original series. Okay, the majority of them have women as the showrunner, some minority, some not. But that starts to color our understanding of the next big show that Netflix tries to push, right? When we watch it, how might we approach watching a new Netflix show knowing that, you know, 23 of these shows have been canceled this year and most of them have been with women showrunners? What are assumptions we might make about those shows or bring to it? Okay, so we might watch them cynically, as Roberto is saying in the chat. Anything else? We might start to think about the relationships differently between minority and women filmmakers and that platform, right? Depending especially on that show. What are some behaviors that might manifest around a new show at this point that is run by a woman or a minority on Netflix? What might there be a big push for? Anyone? I'm trying not to have as much dead air this week based on feedback last week. We might think about whether or not it's going to get more seasons, and it might drive our behavior to really advocate for the show or advocate that more people watch it, right? That might be one thing. Sawyer says more seasons. Sure. The point is, right, here are cultural discussions happening around Netflix that shape and inform our understanding, even outside of the generic elements or like our own pleasure in watching genre films or genre television shows, that shape our understanding and our interaction with it. Okay, and this is part of what Fisk is starting to get at here. In order to understand television, you have to factor in all this stuff. I'm going to give you one more example, taking it outside of Netflix and going kind of much more back to a traditional broadcast show. Okay, what are some of the ways we might watch, from the standpoint of the viewer, something like the Oscars? What are the different ways we can understand or interpret the Oscars, the Academy Awards?
Would it kind of be like in the same form of a game show, in which case like you're really rooting for your favorite shows or your favorite movies or your favorite actors to win?
Okay, so yeah, we can think about it generically, right? So like as something that we root for or want, like we want certain outcomes for, and it is sort of like a game show in that way. We might also, like you mentioned, think about the people who are nominated for the awards themselves, right? And watch the show with certain expectations or assumptions about how those people will be treated, right? Sawyer puts in, we might also think about it as ways to get recommendations of what to watch, right? So something like if it's won an award, it must be good. If I now add in the hashtag Oscars so white, now how does that shape Oscar viewership? Any takers on that one? So we're settling in to watch the Oscars. Hashtag Oscars so white has been a raging debate on Twitter and a little bit on Facebook. Sawyer puts in very cis white het citric. Yes, but that shapes also, right, our understanding of what the Oscars are and what they do, right? It's no longer about, as Michael puts in here, right? It's no longer about like who is the best, because now we're possibly watching from a position of questioning its validity, right? We might start to think through and watch the show as a means of trying to understand the politics behind votership, right? Which creates a much more critical and less passive and engaged viewership, right? So, right, questioning why the shows or movies or actors are award worthy, as Essence said, right? Like, what are we thinking about as awards worthy? What makes one thing more awards worthy than others, right? Well, at least Zootopia is good, Sawyer. I agree, Kubo's great, but Zootopia ain't bad. But all of that also comes down to like another way to understand the Oscars, which is that they're largely governed by studios putting money up for certain films to campaign for them to win specific awards, right? So if a studio doesn't go all out on something or doesn't have as much money, it's less likely that it's going to be the sexy, attractive object for the people voting for that award, depending on what the voting body is. Okay. All right. Are we all sort of clear here on intertextuality? Because I'm going to show us some TV now. And then I'm going to ask you all to do something we haven't done yet and go into breakout sessions. I'll explain that after we watch the thing. But when we go into breakout sections, I'm going to need y'all to talk to one another and then come back and somebody in each group just talk to us in the class and summarize what it is y'all talked about. Are we all okay doing that? We can do that portion, not record it if you don't want to, okay? But we'll talk about it when we come back. What I'm going to do is show y'all 15 entire minutes. We'll talk about it when I get back, Roberto, okay? We're going to do this. I'm going to show y'all 15 minutes, and I really want y'all to like focus in and watch it, okay? Because we haven't done this. It's going to take a minute, so just, watch. We're going to watch the first 15 minutes ever of MTV's broadcast day, okay? So I'm going to pause the recording so we can do that. Okay, so group one, who's leading out of that group?
That'd be me.
Okay, Shay. So walk us through some of the things y'all talked about with the advertising there.
Right. So the main thing we agreed on is that it seems to be targeting a younger demographic, sort of youth culture, sort of the age that most of us are at or below, and also trying to target people who are trying to be sort of, for lack of a word, on the cutting edge or different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah, so even today, right, we tend to think about MTV's target audience as the same. And because of that, the advertising is geared towards an extremely youthful, usually what they want is somebody who can afford things. So they try to sell not quite luxury things, but the emphasis here, right, on like stereo, right, which is something that also come up in just a little bit. So I'm not going to delve too hard into that. But yeah, I think you're right on point. So that informs, right, like all the other stuff going on as well. Like who are they advertising to and what types of things are they advertising, right? So did y'all make anything out of the fact that they were advertising Dolby just sound technology, not even a specific like stereo system or anything like that?
If we did mention it, I'm going to be honest, I do not recall.
Yeah. I mean, part of that too is just like, they're appealing to people who, not to get too far into the VJ stuff, who are interested in kind of like their home stereo system as well, right? Okay. so that we can start talking about all of this stuff together. Who is doing group 2, the videos themselves? How do we interpret those? What are they doing?
That'd be me.
Okay, go ahead, Essence.
So we were discussing how each video kind of had like one central theme. They were all by white artists. They were all kind of dance music in some way, shape, or form, and they would all be considered at the time like popular music. So we were talking about how the producers of the show were definitely looking for young, of course, arguably white teenagers, specifically girls, though we were talking about how the first music video was a dance song, and I don't know, if I'm a older white exec, I think that that's all girls like to do. The second one was a female-led band.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if I didn't know anything about teenage girls, I think that'd be something that they'd be into. And then the third one was Rod Stewart, who apparently was like a super big sex symbol at the time. So again, marketing towards young, hip, fun, but definitely girls, I think, to kind of like move the channel like forward, to kind of get teenage girls to talk about it, so that guys would be up on it too, just to impress girls, and then kind of like moving the network forward like that.
Okay, yeah, and there is a gendered discourse there too, to kind of be picked apart and analyzed, whereas like the type of music, by and large, at least out of this first block that we watched, does have a much more poppy dance appeal to it, right? And it's funny that you mentioned Rod Stewart. Most people, I would assume, don't even know who he is now, although I guess like people's parents like him still. But like he was in 1981, like probably in the same echelon of like new stardom, even though he'd been around for a decade already, as somebody like Prince or David Bowie, like somebody that people really knew. It's also interesting that you pointed out like all the artists were white. This is something MTV pitched itself and had its network identity built around the idea that it was rock and roll centric, because that was safe white music. It wouldn't scare the suburban parents too much, which are always the target demographic for TV networks, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't change, by the way, until Beat It comes out several years later. Michael Jackson's the first black artist played on MTV, and it's largely because indeed, Sawyer, rock and roll made by black artists, indeed. But like they wouldn't play Prince, they wouldn't play any rock music by black artists, literally nothing. What shifted was Thriller came out and was like the best-selling album of all time, and they refused to play videos from it. So what happened was actually David Bowie like threatened and got his label to threaten to pull all of the music videos from any artists on that label off of MTV unless they played Michael Jackson's music videos. And that's where it turned in like 1983 or 84. Okay. Hip hop definitely is never going. I mean, they're not, like I'm saying, they're not playing like Prince records, Essence, right? Like they are definitely not playing hip hop or rapping. The one rap song they do play, it is later, is by Blondie. The rock band Blondie had a song that was very popular called Rhapsody, where like Debbie Harry, as someone in New York's music scenes, was very familiar with rap and hip hop. She was good friends with Grandmaster Flash. Yeah, there you go. And like adopted rapping in part of that song. And it really was kind of like one of the first major transfer points for rap and hip hop into mainstream white culture, that this group Blondie was doing rap in their video, and Grandmaster Flash is in the video and all this stuff. But that video's in there, but it's not by a black artist, right? And Debbie Harry, like much to her credit, also joined with Bowie, is like, listen, you know, if I can do a rap song and have that show up on MTV, the people who are doing this should be able to be on here as well. Okay, group 3, since we're at the end of time, the VJ segments. Who wants to talk to us about the VJs, the video jockeys? Martha Quinn is my forever love, by the way. She was like my first crush when I was a kid. Too much info, I know.
That was me.
Go ahead.
What we were pretty much saying about the video jockeys and what we took away from like what MTV was trying to do was they were literally just trying to move radio onto the video and like see if they could kind of like change it from people listening to their radios every night with their family to watching the TV with their night hold on.
Yeah.
I might have just had a stroke.
Well, I
they
hope
were
not.
shifting from radio to TV, and they were trying to actively recreate radio, but with visuals instead.
Yes, right. And the idea here was that
My brain
they
exploded
knew
out there.
they knew that there was an audience that was listening to FM radio, pop radio, all the time, right? People still do this. I mean, you know, we tend to think about like the shift towards streaming as something that everybody does, but does anybody in here listen to any radio station in Atlanta? Anybody actually listen to radio anymore? I do, and the only station I listen to is Streets 94.5. Okay, and it's because I want to like hear what's new coming up, right? So that's going to give me, because of the mixture in that particular broadcast of kind of like top 40 hip hop as well as local Atlanta based, right? Then you're going to have a new influx of talent that you're aware of, right? So we notice here in the chat, right? Car doesn't have aux cord Bluetooth. Yeah, Essence, right? So you're still in the car, right? Listening. That's where people still listen to music radio. But they know that there are people doing this, right? Who are not watching TV at night. They're like hanging out, smoking joints, living in the garage, doing whatever, that 70s show type stuff, right? Hanging out with their friends. Let's give them something to do so that we can make the ad revenue off of this, as opposed to a radio station making the ad revenue off of this. Okay, so that's their concept. So very good observation. What'd y'all make of this generally? Anybody have general observations as a wrap up here about MTV's first 15 minutes? Okay, that's fine if you don't. Moon landing thing, little much, right? They're very much planting themselves as like, you know, the next step forward. Literally all the ads, right? The very first song, killing off radio, all that stuff, right? Yeah. I'm going to link to this full video for those people who couldn't be in the class, as well as if y'all want to look at it anymore. It's got the first like 3 hours and 56 minutes of the first broadcast day. So you can jump around and kind of see. You're not going to encounter any hip hop or anything, but you know, maybe you'll find it interesting to look through. That's it for today. Any wrap up questions? Are we all clear on the concepts of intertextuality and how it functions? It's going to come back up next week. Okay. Yeah. Innovations. Indeed. They're innovative people. That's what they want you to think of. Okay. So next week, we're going to talk about Ghost Hunters International. If you didn't get a chance to watch it because I added it on kind of late, go back and check that out. It's a fun episode. It's a stupid show. I'll be able to talk to you about it because it's what I wrote about extensively in my own research. So like, you know, it's a good example just because it gives me lots to do that you don't have to talk to me about. Yeah, so we'll come back. We'll talk next week more about, you know, format and genre and Survivor and Ghost Hunters and reality shows. And that's it. Okay, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.